Good morning to Jody. Good morning, everyone. We will get started in a minute or two, just to give a few more folks a chance to join. Please note that this session is being recorded, and we'll get started in just a moment. Okay, well, I think we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining our webinar today, Microsoft Teams, the ultimate collaboration tool for modern businesses. Our presenters today are Rob Spitzer, InterVision's Director of Microsoft Cloud Professional Services, and John Morris, our Principal Architect and Delivery Lead. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat area during the presentation. Rob and John will answer them all at the end. So take it away, Rob.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. If I had been thinking a little better, I would have realized this was December, and I should have called this something like Teams, the Ghosts of Teams Past, Present, and Future, because we're going to talk a little bit about what's here today, what's kind of things you may be already familiar with, things that may be new, and things that are coming down the pike. I'm Rob Spitzer, as Mary mentioned. I'm the director of our Microsoft Professional Services team. So we really cover everything related to kind of the legacy on-premise Microsoft stack, Active Directory, Exchange, Config Manager, all of those kinds of pieces, and the various cloud services. So Microsoft 365, including things like Exchange Online, SharePoint, Intune, various identity and security tools, and then of course Teams, like we'll talk about today. And then we also do a lot in the Azure infrastructure space. So we do a lot of lift and shift, hybrid cloud configurations, as well as Azure virtual desktops. So we kind of do everything other than software development and managed services. However, InterVision has those covered. We'll talk about those a little bit later as well. But we make up kind of that professional services, everything from small projects up to large migrations. John is one of the practice leads within our team. He focuses around the modern work stack, so the Microsoft 365 tools, and has a lot of real-world hands-on experience with these various tools. And we'll actually talk a little bit later about a nice success story we had with a customer. So let's start out by talking a little bit about current trends. So these haven't changed a lot over the last few years. So these will kind of resonate and probably feel pretty consistent with what you've seen and have been seeing. The first has really been the case for probably the better part of a decade now. We are consistently being asked to do more, and we're being consistently given smaller budgets to do that with. IT budgets have been flat in most cases, have been declining in others. It's just the fact of life. Part of the way that's being dealt with, of course, is taking advantage of more modern cloud-based solutions, and so that's resulting in data centers shrinking in size. We're seeing that consistently. More and more line of business applications, productivity tools, things like that are moving to the cloud, and customers are looking around and figuring out what's left and what maybe can move to various cloud services as well. While not directly related to the conversation we're having here today, but very Microsoft focused, a very common theme we're seeing in this space is Do I need Active Directory anymore? Do I need domain controllers? Um, Most customers are kind of marching towards a future where that may very well be the case. Active Directory tends to be kind of a first in, last out technology. So as long as there are line of business or other applications that live within the domain, you kind of need it. But with probably in the next 5 to 10 years, that's going to become a more and more consistent theme, organizations that are living in this post-AD world. Um, Security continues to be more important than ever, right? One of the beauties of a lot of these cloud solutions are anytime, anywhere access to your data. One of the scary bits is anytime, anywhere access to your data. The more you kind of spread out past the corporate firewall, the more security matters. None of us wants to find ourselves as the next headliner. So security needs to continue to be front and center on these tools. And then the workforce is more distributed. Prior to COVID, most everybody worked in the office. During COVID, most everybody worked from home. We're now in a position where we're hybrid, and hybrid appears to be here to stay. That's for a number of reasons. One was kind of during COVID, there was hiring that occurred where people were not located in their local geographies with their offices. I'm a good example of this. The closest InterVision office is an hour and 15 minutes away from me. So while I can get there, it makes zero sense for me to be there daily. However, there are folks who live right there and prefer to be in the office and want to be in there and work in person with each other. So how do we bridge those gaps in a way that doesn't, keeps everybody as kind of a first party citizen within the organization, right? We've all kind of been involved in those hybrid scenarios where it's loud and gangly and obnoxious. And Actually, it's funny. I just saw that question that pop up. We will get to that one actually in a minute. Yeah, we've all kind of been involved in those kinds of scenarios, and it can be a real kind of pain and something you need to work around. So, common trends we're seeing in the market as of today. So we're focusing on Microsoft Teams today, right? Microsoft Teams is Microsoft's collaboration as a service platform. It allows for collaboration from anywhere on any device. And when we say any device, that's going to be Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, or really anywhere that you can run a web browser. You can participate in Teams from pretty much any modern browser as well. So from other systems that may not have a dedicated application you can get on from there. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that in a little more detail here in a second. But outside of collaboration, it's also a full conferencing solution, including audio and video conferencing, desktop sharing, again, all of the things you think about with conferencing. It is also a full featured phone system. So it can take the place of traditional PBX or other cloud-based phone systems. It is a full collaboration platform. So typically when we talk platform, right, we're talking about multiple components, multiple features, the ability to extend that platform out. And in that extensibility, we'll also talk a little bit as we're going along about this being a platform for the future. John will specifically talk about some of the AI extensibility that's coming down the pike within Teams. So we're going to drill into each of these areas a little bit and kind of talk a little more about what each of these look like and how you can kind of take advantage of them. So collaboration, at the heart of Teams, it is a collaboration tool. When we talk collaboration, that can be one-on-one or team-based chat, so the ability to communicate within a larger organization or just one-on-one if we're trying to have a direct conversation. Teams can cover a multitude of things, right? So you might have teams that represent the entire organization. Maybe you've got an announcement team or channel that you can cover things like announcements. Maybe you've got department-based teams where HR has a team, engineering has a team, where the folks that are involved in those real teams actually have a virtual team that kind of maps in there, and they can kind of keep track of what's going on. Teams can be made up of multiple channels to cover multiple to kind of organize the data within that team. So maybe there's an engineering team, but in there's separate channels for cloud and on-premise and networking infrastructure and data center and things like that. Teams can also be ephemeral. So maybe you spin them up for a project, right? I've got a project, I've got a group of engineers or a group of people across the organization that need to be brought together for a period of time to work on a project. And so teams can map to individual projects. You can really kind of build it in whichever way or all of those ways that make the most sense for your organization. It's another Microsoft 365 product, so it kind of supports the things you would expect, including rich text editing. You're not just stuck with flat unformatted text. You can bold, you can underline, use different fonts, change font sizes, bullets, the things you'd expect. Full support for things like emojis and animated GIFs. Those are all controllable, or especially like the animated GIFs if you don't want to allow things like that. But they do support all of that kind of stuff that just helps to make people feel more comfortable and a lot of times in using these tools. Under the covers, Teams is built on top of, or partially built on top of SharePoint. And so all of the features that come with SharePoint are available here as well, including the ability to share files, do co-authoring, do version history, things like that. So if you can have multiple folks working on a presentation at the same time, as John and Mary and I were working on this presentation, we had it shared out. We're using that capability right up really until the last few minutes of this call to kind of tweak and polish, and we didn't have to deal with pass the baton around. We were able to work in there together. Now, I mentioned earlier, security matters, right? Well, this is again also kind of building on top of that Microsoft 365 underpinnings in SharePoint. And so any compliancy and security tools you may have built out already you'll be able to use as well, right? So if you've built you've kind of built your basis of security within SharePoint, it's going to apply if you put in place things like conditional access rules, data loss prevention rules, things like that. They're going to apply here. You don't have to. This isn't really a separate silo. It's part of this larger Microsoft 365 ecosystem, and so you get to take advantage of those security framework that you may have already put in place around that larger Microsoft 365 environment. There's also some kind of really interesting, a lot of the stuff we've talked about so far, you'll find in other solutions, right? From Cisco, from Google, et cetera. But Microsoft's got some really kind of interesting, unique features of their own. One of the ones I kind of wanted to point out is real-time translation, because as organizations get more diverse, things like the ability to support multiple native languages might come in handy. Organization might need to be able to support Spanish and English speakers, and people can type messages in the language of their choice, and they will be translated in real time in the language of the reader's choice. So you have that kind of some of those interesting modern features there that just really kind of help to bridge the gaps between a more diverse workforce. The second pillar I wanted to talk about in Teams is meetings. So Teams is a full-featured conferencing solution. That can be everything from small meetings consisting of, one or two, or, I guess one person doesn't count as a meeting, but 2 or 3 people, all the way up to thousands. This includes the ability to do meetings where everybody has the ability to participate, or events like we're doing here. Now, somebody asked the obvious question, and we've had this laugh internally ourselves. Why in the world are we doing a Teams webinar through WebEx? That's a limitation on our side. Our marketing system is tied into WebEx, so we just kind of had to roll with that. Otherwise, we would have had to get into kind of a little bit of a complicated scenario of sending out invites. but Teams is a full event platform and the ability to support all the live events and meeting features you'd expect, right? The ability to do things like breakout rooms and chats and moderations, and again, the things you'd kind of expect are all built in, are all part of the Teams platform. Ability to do audio and video conferencing is all in there. That includes, again, the things we've all kind of expected. I think John and Mary are doing, you're kind of seeing this today with the blurred or the virtual backgrounds. That capability exists in Teams as well. They actually have been released some newer features, depending on which licensing and what cameras you have, that actually bring AI and depth sensing into the equation, so it can better detect the person from the background. And so it just helps to alleviate that weird kind of halo effect you get when folks do the blurred or virtual backgrounds. There's also the ability to do different layout features. You can do the grid, and there's different kind of grid layouts. You can put things. You can do a speaker view where the speakers standing out there. There's also what's called together mode. You've probably seen pictures of this, where basically virtual cutouts of each person is put in a chair alongside of each other, and it just kind of helps to break up the monotony of the kind of the Brady Bunch view we're all kind of used to seeing within meetings. I mentioned already there are apps for Windows, Mac, iOS, and Android, but if you've got cases of where you need to support participants who maybe either aren't sitting in front of a device that has Teams installed, or maybe they're just like on a conference phone in a room and they just don't have Teams on it. There's also the full ability to do dial in and dial out support, right? So a participant can dial in to a number with a code, or the host can dial out to others and include them into a meeting. So if you have that kind of capability as well, all kind of baked into the platform. Again, you can do all the desktop and application sharing that you kind of expect, right? You can share a full desktop, you can share individual applications, but there's also some kind of secret sauce Teams brings to the equation. One of my favorite features is presenter mode, where basically what ends up happening is, and right now what I'm doing is I'm sharing a PowerPoint from my desktop. Prior to the start of this meeting, I had to go close everything out, turn off notifications, because I wanted to make sure things don't pop up on the screen. We've all still run in, and it could happen still in this conversation. Things don't always behave and obey those rules, so it's possible something will pop up on the screen. What the presenter mode in Teams does is allow you to take that PowerPoint, upload it to the cloud. You then, as the host, are driving the meeting from your machine, but you're controlling this cloud instance. Viewers are watching this cloud instance. And so now all of a sudden, all of the noise and cruft from my machine are out of the equation. But then you can also do things like recipients or viewers can download the presentation. They'll have that option. If you allow them, you can turn that off. And they have the ability, again, if you allow them, to move forward and backwards in the presentation. I know I've run into cases before where I've been on a webinar like this, something said on a previous slide and it didn't really resonate until 2 or 3 slides later. And like, wait a minute, I want to jump back and see what that was. And now you're kind of stuck waiting until the presentation is sent out to you, because you don't have that ability to move forward and backwards in real time. Again, you can turn that off if you don't want people to be able to do that, but you do have those kinds of capabilities if you want them. The last item I'll mention is support for Teams rooms. So, again, we've talked a lot about individual devices, Windows machines, Macs, iOS, and Android. But in this hybrid world, we got to be able to support conference rooms too, right? And bring them into the fold in a way that makes this a good experience for everybody, right? And sticking a laptop in the middle of a table is not a good experience for the folks that are on the other side of a call. With Teams room systems, you can build out full-featured conference room systems. Everything from small huddle rooms that might consist of a small kind of one-piece mic, camera, speaker array that sits on top of a TV screen, up to large customized like executive conference room solutions where you're supporting multiple mics, multiple cameras, multiple screens, very customized to that size room or that size layout. Executive conference rooms, like I mentioned, come into play here. Training centers, a lot of times will use these more complex configurations, but multiple sizes. Microsoft makes some first-party room system equipment. However, they really rely on their third-party partner, the third-party partner world, including companies like Poly, Crestron, other players in that space. Now, one of the things Microsoft has done over the last, since Teams has come out, is they've kind of taken a play from their Windows playbook. So in the Windows world, we're all kind of used to the fact that Lenovo and Dell may have very different looking hardware. A Lenovo laptop may look very different than a Dell laptop, but they're all running Windows. The actual GUI I'm seeing looks the same. Microsoft has done the same with room systems. Whether you get something from Crestron, Poly, Yealink, whoever the player is, the hardware may look drastically different, especially when you get into larger size rooms and things like that. But at the end of the day, they're running the Teams room system application. So you will see the same interface in a Teams room system as you would see in Teams on Windows, on iOS, et cetera. So it allows for a very consistent experience across these various devices. Another kind of nice thing is, well, obviously a room system can do one button to join to Teams meetings, but they can also do one button to join to WebEx and Zoom meetings. So if you work with partners or other vendors that are supporting these other platforms and they've sent you a meeting request for those, you can jump into that meeting request, or you can just go into that conference room, one button to click and join those meetings from those. No additional licensing is needed outside of just the typical Teams room licensing. Yep, and now Siri is talking to me. All right, stop. There we go. All right. So the third pillar I wanted to talk about is phone system. Phone system, as I mentioned up front, it used to be called Cloud PBX. It is your phone system in the cloud. This is now kind of a little tangent here for a second. A lot of folks have kind of asked how real is this, right? Because it kind of feels like this is something new. Microsoft has been in the PBX space since the 90s. They used to support a tool called Real-Time Communication Server that became Live Communication Server that became Link Server. Skype for Business. They've been doing Skype on the consumer side. They've had this kind of long history as a telco, doing phone system capabilities. Fast forward a few years ago, and they became a full telco. They built kind of that, so they took that kind of tradition they had on premise, built it out as a cloud solution, actually became a full telecom, providing the back end support for DIDs and things like that. And we now have Teams phone system. It is relatively simple and scalable. So whether you're talking about, 4-user small office, that's fairly easy to get up and running, but it can scale out to thousands and thousands of users. John will talk about one of those kind of enterprise level projects here in a minute, but it is a very scalable solution. It's also very full featured. It supports the things you'd expect. You can do auto attendants that support, different schedules for based on the time of day versus nights and weekends or holidays. Support for call queues that can be either simultaneous or serial ring or round robin. Again, things you kind of expect. Those can be built out, nested together to build very complicated phone trees that kind of mimic and match your environment. But what's also cool is they've got some really good, again, Microsoft's been really kind of heavy in this AI space. They've got really good text to speech capability. We've talked a little bit about speech to text already and kind of real time, some transcription stuff, but it works the other way too, where you can of course, record messages for auto attendants, but you can also type them out, and the speech is really solid. Why do that over just recording somebody speaking? Because it makes it really easy to edit. Everybody's kind of run into this problem in the past with a phone system where they had like a 1 minute recording. They needed to change like maybe hours of operation. And so they had to go re-record this entire, message to basically change the closing time went from 5 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. or something like that. So it makes it real easy if it's just changing some text and then it reads the system. It is very solid. There's support for full call recording and transcription. So as messages come in, they will be transcribed. What's really cool, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to do transcription in multiple languages, and it applies here as well. So like we've dealt with a company that had a bilingual staff and a bilingual customer base. And so as they get voicemails in, messages are being, regardless of whether the caller was speaking English or Spanish, the message is transcribed into both English and Spanish so that the recipient, regardless of their native language, will be able to kind of take that message and act upon it. So that capability is all in there. Support for all of the latest E911 features are built in the box. So you can map your E911 requirements now provide you to be able to not only get emergency personnel to a building, but actually like to the floor level, the suite level, things like that. So they can kind of get as close to the emergency as possible. And you can map out your structure within Teams phone system to allow that dynamic E911 that's required by some of the latest laws. I mentioned again, Microsoft's been building on a long history here. And so just like you've seen elsewhere, they're building on a history of partnerships with other vendors. And so we're not just limited to what Microsoft offers. Similar to the Room system story, there's a full suite of handsets. I think the one pictured here on the screen is like a Yealink handset. But what you're seeing is, again, it's there regardless of whether you bought a handset from like Yealink or Poly or another vendor. They're all running the Teams interface, and therefore they're all going to be very consistent, regardless of whether you're trying to use just the soft phone within the Teams app or you're using a hardware phone. Very, very consistent experience. There's also an ability to plug into a much larger ecosystem of partners that have got solutions that integrate into Teams. That includes things like overhead paging solutions and emergency alerting systems like Informacast, the ability to hook into contact center solutions like Amazon Connect, auto attendant, receptionist desk console from like Landis makes a receptionist console. Even things like we can deploy session border controllers and hook into do hybrid configurations with like an on-premise PBX if that needs to be there. So like for instance, if you need to support not only Teams phone system, but also like WebEx UC or Cisco UC, you can deploy a Cisco Cube in the middle and connect those things together and have a hybrid phone system if that needs to be there. So again, very scalable. You can meet pretty much every need. We've run into very few situations where there isn't a solution that Teams phone system will plug into. So I'm going to use this moment to transition over to John. John's going to talk about one of those specific Teams phone system projects we've done recently. And so with that, John, I am going to turn the floor over to you.
All right. So earlier this year, Aegeon came to us with a couple business problems. The main one, though, was that, like a lot of us, they transitioned to a hybrid work model. Users could work from home, the office, the coffee shop down the street. But their current phone system did not support that. The only place the phone system worked was in the office. So we had proposed moving them to Teams Voice, and also pulling in one of those partners Rob was talking about, Call Tower. Call Tower provides the dial tone services for this project, and that allowed us to meet the do more with less that everyone has to deal with these days. So we were able to move a little over 2,500 phone numbers across offices in Canada and the US. And with the way that the Teams Voice projects flow, we were able to put the entire configuration in place before moving the phone numbers over to Teams, which lets us do things like test all of the auto attendants, the user configurations ahead of time, so that when we did do these two very large ports for them, users had no interruption in service. Users simply went from making a phone, finishing a phone call on their Cisco system. The port happened in the middle of that phone call. End users were not affected at all. They hang up. Next phone call came in on Teams Voice. So now Aegeon is able to work from the office, from home, their car, and utilize their actual business phone system. And we were able to do that with giving Aegeon a 50% or more month-over-month reduction in cost from their old phone system in the process.
Good deal. You ready for me to roll forward for you, John?
Yes, I am.
All right.
All right, Copilot for Microsoft 365. So this is Microsoft's artificial intelligence solution that is really meant for the end user. It's all about employee productivity. So Copilot is your typical AI, think things like ChatGPT, Bing Chat, but it combines those kind of AI solutions with all of the data that lives inside of your Microsoft tenant. And then we can extend that to external business data as well. But it takes that and puts it inside of all of the Microsoft applications, things like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and of course Teams. So we'll be able to go into Teams and say we have a meeting that conflicts with something else. So instead of spending the next hour after that meeting having somebody catch you up on what you missed, you'll be able to tell Copilot to follow along that meeting for you. And once that meeting is over, it will send you a full summary of everything you missed, any action items or follow-ups that apply specifically to you. And you'll also be able to ask Copilot questions about that meeting if you need additional information. We can do things like create a first draft of a new PowerPoint presentation based on a transcript of a meeting that we just completed inside of Teams. So it's really all about employee productivity and bringing these AI tools to the end user and not just to, higher level business processes. The early adopter program that Microsoft recently completed showed that users on average were at least 30% more productive when they were using Copilot compared to not using Copilot. Now, with a new technology like this, there are a number of things that we need to prepare for organizations that want to deploy artificial intelligence, a number of prereqs, a number of security things that just make sense to review before this becomes available next year. But we believe at this point it'll be early next year when this is fully released. So if you are interested in getting Copilot or even a proof of concept when this gets out, definitely reach out to your InterVision account rep so we can talk about the things that need to happen ahead of time.
All right. Thank you, John. So, all right. So we're kind of coming into the last bit here. But why Microsoft Cloud Solutions? Obviously, there are other platforms you can use. We're on one right now, which we've already mentioned is kind of silly, but it just was how this played out. But why go the Microsoft route? Because it's pretty battle tested at this point in time. Over 1 million companies are actively using Microsoft 365 solutions today. Office 365, the productivity tools make up 40% of the cloud productivity market. Everybody, it's the other big player, of course, in there is Google, and then what's left is, kind of everybody else, a free for all for everybody else. So they're really kind of the largest or one of the largest players in that space. Azure is used by over 75% of companies worldwide. So again, these are not new solutions. They're not solutions that Microsoft is dabbling in. They're all in. And one of the things to keep in mind is they're a little more all in than everybody else. So when you talk cloud, we're typically talking software as a service, platform as a service, infrastructure as a service. Most vendors kind of play in some of those spaces, but not all. Google is a good example of one that does play in all, right? They've got GCP as well as Google Workspace. But they've had way better luck with their productivity suite than they had with their infrastructure platform. Amazon's kind of the opposite, right? They've got tools again in all three of these levels as well, but they've had way better luck with the AWS, the IaaS and really the PaaS solutions than they had with their SaaS solutions. Other players really are kind of just all in on the SaaS side, folks like Zoom, Cisco, kind of those folks. So Microsoft is kind of one of the few that really has got a major push in the SaaS space and in the IaaS and in the PaaS space. And so they're able to kind of take advantage of the fact that you've got, kind of have that data kind of all in their cloud when it comes to some of these tools like Copilot, John just mentioned. But the other thing I'll throw out there is kind of the last little bullet in the Magic Quadrant that's up here. So historically, Microsoft has forever included tools in the box for various solutions, and kind of the historical logic has been, well, Microsoft includes kind of a good enough solution, but if you need a best of breed solution, you really need product X. We heard this a lot, like for instance, with like Zix and message encryption. Microsoft has that in the box, but Zix is better. Or, Microsoft has Link Server, but you really need like Cisco UC. That's the best of breed product. That's kind of, again, been the case for a long period of time. Well, an interesting thing has happened over the last 10 years. Microsoft has become one of those top Magic Quadrant companies. So there's about a dozen categories now where they're in that upper right corner of Gartner Magic Quadrant. This particular one is for unified communications as a service, so UC as a service. So this is going to include things like WebEx, RingCentral, Zoom, Google, lots of other players in there. And you will see they are the top right of the Magic Quadrant as of June 2023. So again, that kind of old school logic of Microsoft is maybe good enough, but I really need another solution has faded away. Couple that with the platform approach, and you can kind of start to see there is this synergy between this platform approach Microsoft is taking. Okay, great. Why us? Why InterVision? So I like to kind of point out when we're talking about InterVision, one of the things that's our secret sauce is while you're talking on this call, to two folks from a Microsoft team who are very focused on Microsoft technologies, that's not our only partner, right? We partner with a number of other big players, Cisco, Amazon. There's a fairly long list. So we're not just trying to force feed a customer the vendor we represent a number of the best of breed vendors. So we really do try to build a relationship with our customers and understand their unique needs. If Microsoft solutions are the best, we'll tell you. If they're not, we'll let you know that as well. But we'll try to, again, we're trying to build that relationship. That relationship building starts with listening. We do all, we all like the cool fancy tools, but we will try to start by listening and make sure we understand your unique needs. So we try to make sure we get the right technology, the right premise, the right model. So from the technology perspective, as I mentioned, we represent a number of best of breed vendors. And so we'll look at your unique requirements. What's the right solution for those? We also, like I mentioned, even just in our team, we support both cloud and traditional on-premise. So we'll help you figure out where the right location is. Is that cloud? Is that on-premise? Is that some sort of colo facility or hosting solution? We'll help you figure that one out as well. And then we try to provide the right model. Are you just looking for guidance and help with maybe some planning of a project, or maybe I need help with deploying of a new solution, but we got it from that point. We offer professional services. Again, that's what our team does. But if you're also looking for managed services, we provide those as well. And then, of course, those can be mixed together, right? We want managed services, but we need help deploying a new solution. We're a unique vendor in the fact that we represent a number of top tier partners, and we've got both professional services and managed services as part of the organization, and the ability and legacy and kind of modern technology. So specifically on the Microsoft team, let's kind of talk about that briefly as well. So within our Microsoft team, we've got 16 consultants that are dedicated to Microsoft platform technology. You've met John. He represents the Microsoft 365 stack. We've got folks that are specialize in things like config manager or Intune or endpoint management as a whole. We've got folks who concentrate on Azure migrations, Azure virtual desktops, things like that. Folks that eat, sleep, and breathe Microsoft technologies. But we also got about another dozen what I would refer to as co-sell engineers. These are folks in other departments in InterVision but we bring them into projects to help in areas that make the most sense. For instance, if we're doing like an Azure deployment, it's relatively easy to get like a site-to-site VPN connection set up between Azure and on-prem. But what if your networking needs are way more complicated than that? We work with our Cisco and our networking group to deploy things like virtual appliances, whether those are Cisco, Meraki, Palo, what have you. They can deploy those things in Azure and build very complicated network structures, can do things like direct routing, things like that. So they can get very complex and get down and dirty. It's hard to take a Microsoft engineer and turn him into a network engineer, and it makes zero sense to do that when we've got some of the best networking engineers working for us. We just kind of bridge the gap into the Azure space. We do similar on the team side. We've got a full audio video group. Building out a conference room is a construction project, right? It's different than an IT project. We've got folks who specialize in that. And so we use our AV practice to, even though they're not part of the Microsoft team, they may do Cisco or other solutions as well. They know how to spec out a room and fit the right room system to that room. And how to, what specialties are required, whether that's carpentry or electricians, things like that, to make those work. We work with our our Cisco collaboration team for doing some of those more complicated tie-ins with like Cisco cubes and hybrid Cisco deployments. So again, we try to take advantage of the fact that we've got these specialized skills in this organization to really help us to build out more complicated projects. That is really our secret sauce. On the Microsoft team, we've got dedicated project managers and a dedicated adoption specialist floating around, or part of that as well. Our adoption specialist will do things like help you figure out what are the right size licensing, right? When you're talking about Microsoft licensing, that can get very complicated. You know, the easy path may be just to buy an E5, but our adoption specialist can help you figure out what's the actual right size for your needs. We offer a full breadth of professional services, like I mentioned, everything from small planning engagements. Maybe you're just looking for a couple hours of a smart person's time in a particular area to bounce some questions off of. Maybe you're looking for planning and deployment help. We can do those up to white glove, you know, do this migration, do this setup, and let us know when you're done. As I mentioned, there's also a full managed services group within InterVision. So anything we deploy, they can manage, including teams. There's also a full DevOps group within the organization. So especially as we get into the cloud, maybe you're trying to modernize an old application. You know, we talked about data centers getting smaller and folks going away. Maybe you're trying to take an old Access database and modernize it into a modern web app or mobile app. Our innovation team can help do that kind of stuff, as well as to help kind of build workflows and things between disparate SaaS applications. So we can kind of get into, again, very complicated structures. We are a direct CSP or a tier 1 CSP, so we can sell any of the Microsoft licensing. So again, we represent really kind of the full breadth of a Microsoft practice, but within a larger organization that represents really a full breadth of that can hopefully meet all of your IT needs. All right, with that, I have been talking now for a bunch. So at this point, I will turn it over to you all. I think there have been a few questions that have popped up. If somebody can help us maybe read out, Mary or John, if you all could provide some of those questions, that would be great.
Sure. We just had a question from Jody saying, you mentioned there have been very few hurdles that you've run into that you couldn't solve. I would like to know some of the hurdles, limitations that you've found.
I'll speak, and then John, if you've got anything to add, chime in as well. Probably the one organization I know we ran into where this wasn't a fit, or actually I think what it ended up being was it only ended up being a partial fit, was a manufacturing company. What you'll probably find if you look at like the team's handsets, so this was a phone system project or a potential phone system project. If you look at the handsets, and this is changing, but at the time, they were very much built for information worker use, right? They're designed to sit on a desktop in an nice air conditioned environment. What you don't find are handsets that are designed to be on a manufacturing floor. Things that are electrically neutral, are ruggedized, volume levels can be cranked up to 100 because there's loud equipment running in the background. They're just not really, at the time, weren't really designed for that. We're starting to see some sign of that stuff popping in, but that's been one area. The other has been in some retail where they were and you'll kind of see a theme here, right? A lot of this is dealing with handsets. But retail was another one we ran into where we had a company we were talking to that they were like one of these companies you'd see at a mall, right? And so they were trying to, they might have 2 or 3 people in the store that are carrying wireless phones around in the store. You won't find really a direct solution for that either. You could get away with what we talked to that particular customer about doing was just deploying Android handsets running the Teams app, but I think at the end of the day, they didn't decide to go that route, or they may, to be honest, it may have just stalled out at this point and they may circle back to it. But those have been kind of two of the areas where I've seen really, it's funny, the stuff everybody's worried about are, can I do, are there any auto attendant and call queue limitations and contact center and things like that. It typically boils down to handsets. The last example I'll give you, and this is one we've learned, we've gotten a lot smarter with. We had one project that got derailed because they did not bring the receptionist in as a key stakeholder early on. And she asked the question of, where is my attendant console? Like, she wanted the console with the million buttons. We're like, oh no, we've got something better. It's a PC and you're just going to wear a headset and you got the computer screen and you can just, use it and it's great and it's wonderful. And basically the response is, you will pry the receptionist console from my cold dead hands. And they decided she was shortly into retirement, so they just held off for a few years. But again, you kind of see a theme, right? It tends to be kind of handset limitations that have come up, but I don't know. Hopefully that answers the question. John, any additional ones you can think of?
No, the only additional one, and it's no longer the case, is that we didn't used to have the call center pieces as integrated, where you could do things like whisper to another call agent or take over those calls, but those pieces are now being integrated natively, so that doesn't apply anymore.
Cool.
Great. We have one other question. Does Teams now have integrated fax ability, or does that still require a third-party solution?
No and yes. So they don't, although, so they don't at the moment. It still requires a third party. John,
Yeah.
is that
So, like you said, yes and no. So, no, there is no native fax to pull a fax into the Teams platform. We found most customers, the Teams platform isn't really where they work with the faxes anyway. It's more of a fax to email when we start getting more electronic on faxing. It is an area where Microsoft does lean on the partner ecosystem. So there are third-party partners if we do want to pull the fax directly into Teams. But it really just boils down to the individual business requirements of that phone system project. So if we're doing something like direct routing, where we utilize SIP trunks that you already have on site, we can still get the analog through to a physical fax machine if that's in use today.
I think the additional part of that question was paging/intercom integration, using facility speakers, not speaker phones.
Yeah, so there's a couple solutions. So the short answer is there are solutions to that. The longer answer is there's kind of the typical, there's Cadillac and Chevy, although there's really nice Chevys out there, but you get the analogy. Informacast or some single wire, if you're familiar with those, supports Teams phone system, so we can integrate into those. And then they've got basically what ends up happening there is there's kind of gear that gets put on premise that then hooks into the various paging solutions that you have, which could be analog or IP-based speakers. They can also do things like SMS paging if you needed to send out, like schools if they need to send out alerts. So there are that. And then there's another vendor whose name's escaping me at the moment, that has kind of a smaller kind of paging as a service feature, where basically they have kind of built that in the cloud, and then they've got a couple adapters that support a couple different on-premise solutions. So the problem with the Informacast solution is it's not cheap. So if really what you're trying to drive is like two old speakers in the environment, it's a rather pricey way to do it. There's kind of a cheaper route to get down there.
All right, well, we had a couple more questions come through. So here's the next one. If you have a Teams number, Can you receive text messages on it?
Not
That is
today.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah, so not currently. It's something we think internally may be coming at some point in time, just because of what Microsoft has done on the commercial or the consumer side of Teams, because that feature is available on the consumer version, but it's not yet been pulled over to the commercial side of it yet. But there are third-party vendors that can do that SMS integration as well.
And actually, one of them, John mentioned earlier, right? Call Tower, who we use for some of the, there's a whole kind of longer story there on why we use them for the actual telephone provider over just porting numbers to Microsoft. They've got some unique capabilities for larger deployments, but they also offer some third-party things, and texting is one of those.
All right, next question is a little lengthy here, so bear with me. Does Microsoft offer call center, call queue, and auto attendant natively? Today, we have our phone system through a voice vendor, and they use WebEx as the front end, but just curious if we can use Microsoft as the voice vendor, and if they provide all the call center options, because we have sales teams that's on queue and wanted to see if Microsoft has something native.
So yes, and sort of. And again, John, feel free to chime in as we're going on this. So let's take the yes and the yes. Auto attendant and call queues, yes, that's absolutely baked in, and you can get really complicated, right? Folks are always concerned on, can we map our auto attendant and call queue structure? Yes, you can get as complicated as you need to in there. And again, you can do the things you kind of expect with auto attendants, where there's different schedules for different times of day, for holidays, things like that. That is fully fleshed out. Microsoft contact center is where I got into the sort of maybe category. It kind of depends on the needs, right? So at the most basic, we've talked to some customers who had contact center solutions, and really all they just needed was the ability to do kind of different types of rings within call queues and kind of handle stuff like that. That's built into the box. Microsoft has bought Nuance, I think was the name of it. They bought a third-party company for let's say contact center vendor. That one's still kind of fleshing out, but then you can plug into a number of third-party contact center solutions. So like, for instance, one that frequently comes up is Amazon Connect. We've done projects where those two are integrated together, right? Connect is being used for the contact center solution, with Teams phone system doing the rest of it. John, I miss anything there?
Now, the only other thing is what I mentioned earlier about the call recording, call drop-in, where a manager can take over a phone call if needed or listen in. All of those pieces are now available as well. So it just depends on the individual needs.
All right, it was a thank you to that, gentlemen. It looks like we don't have any other questions. Rob, how would one go about getting more information, or if they have any other questions? Is there a way to reach you, or what would you suggest there?
Yeah, so the best course of action kind of for next steps is, if anything looked intriguing here, anything you want to dig into deeper, reach out to, if you have an existing InterVision account manager, reach out to them. And they can help get a call scheduled with John or myself, and we can dig into we can either talk generally about Teams, or if typically where these conversations get into are kind of specific features in there, right? We're looking at phone system, we're looking at meetings, what have you. We can have whatever conversation you need, but we can dig in deeper there. If you don't have an existing InterVision account manager, you can reach out to me directly. My email address is rspitzer@intervision.com. So feel free to shoot me a message. And I think we've recorded this presentation. So if anybody else, you like to share it with somebody else in your organization who maybe couldn't attend, they could do that. But also, if you ever need us to kind of go through any of this again with a larger audience within your organization, we can do that as well.
Wonderful. Great presentation. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, John. We hope everyone found this insightful, and we appreciate you joining us today. Have a great day.
Thank you very much.